PacWest Bigfoot. That was me swallowing awesome coffee from the Sasquatch Coffee Company. Anyways, all right. First and foremost, I want to say to those of you who have been donating and everything, thank you so very much. It has really helped out with running everything here and the time spent on it and whatnot. God bless you, and you are literally in the prayers of my family. As a matter of fact, I finally got everything back on the website. Well, most everything. I have collected back the 47 different encounter stories I had up until that point, and I'm still, working on them. Just so you know, I'll also be introducing the winner of the awesome coffee mug this month. I'm giving away a coffee mug with Patty on the side from the William Jevning group. So he's a research group out of Northern California. So that's going to happen. Also on the YouTube channel, here's the deal. We are getting a few people from around this particular subject matter who they're kind of rude, mean little trolls and stuff. Don't worry about them. Let them go. Trying to argue with them is, yeah, no, it's kind of a waste of time. As a matter of fact, here's the deal. If you're here for pure research, you're in the wrong place. As a matter of fact, these encounter stories that I get firsthand or secondhand, I am not going through and trying to authenticate these things. I'm just creating the stories around the experiences and encounters for them because people have asked me to. So that's what's happening here. If you don't like that and you're not comfortable with that, then just don't be here. If you like it and you just love it for fun and it's interesting and it's cool or whatever and you just love to hear them from time to time, awesome, welcome, thank you for being here. So there you have it. This week, we're actually going to... this is actually a really interesting story. And this one did come to me firsthand. And the lady is actually interested possibly in doing an interview. Not really sure. She'll let me know. But I really like this one because it really did seem to be authentic. And like I said, I'm not here to, decide whether or not, or, do whatever to authenticate these things, but I really did like it. It was very interesting. So let's get to it. This week, young woman gets dragged in tent by Bigfoot along the Klamath River. So it's one thing to play with the idea that Bigfoot might exist. It's a whole other to have not just one, but two of them drag your tent with you in it. I know it sounds extraordinary, and it was, to tell you the truth. But it is what happened that spring break to me in Northern California. I thought at the time I was in mortal danger. Here is my encounter, and I hope it keeps you safe. My spring breaks are different. In the late 1990s, I was attending UC Davis at the time. If you don't know, Davis is located southwest of Sacramento, California, about 20 minutes at the most, given good traffic. Originally, however, I am from Wairika, born and raised. Back then, I was what you called a tree-hugging, hippie, the earth is my mother druid college girl, and I mean that in a good way. Today, well, I'm the mother of two, a real upper middle class entrepreneur out of Chico, California, a real 180 to tell you the truth. And that is about as much of me as you are going to know, at least for now. I am thinking about the interview thing still. But until then, I do want to share what happened that spring break. Seriously, I was dragged while in my tent, camping along the Klamath River. What is funny, though, were the signs that even a seasoned camper like myself who loved to spend time in the woods should have noticed, but didn't. I didn't. I really didn't. And I guess that was my bad, I suppose. I still camp with my family today. The chances of an encounter like that, again, is astronomical at best. So, after a while, over time, I got past the fear. However, I am very cautious, especially with my kids while enjoying the outdoors. My spring breaks back then were different than most of my classmates. While they opted for Cancun, San Diego, and even Florida, I enjoyed my backyard, the Pacific Northwest, especially along the Klamath River, not far from where I'm from in Wairika. That spring, my third year in college to be exact, I would be home for 4 nights of camping and a couple nights spent with Mom and Dad for good measure. There is a little campground not too far away from Wairika, out near Scott Bar, but for now I will keep the name of the exact site to myself for now. I got to take off almost a whole day early before most everyone else. My class load that day before spring break was basically non-existent. So I packed up some clothes and took a few hours or so ride back home to see Mom and Dad. I would head out for camping most of the week the next day. I decided to go ahead and stay the first night with my parents and head off that next morning. The extra 45-minute driving time by the time I got to my mom and dad's, it was just something I didn't want to do. Besides, it was not like I had reservations. It was first come, first served there, actually. Eastbound and down, loaded up and truckin'. So my mom and dad were their typical "we have not seen you in forever" selves that evening. And of course, Dad had all my camping gear ready for me to load up, laying on the inside of the garage. And today I miss my dad. He was a great guy and a real planner. I was a planner too. The only thing I was not was apparently not in tune to the signs that would be around me while camping. I mean, seriously, I wish I had my mother's intuition instead of the planning thing at the time. Either way, it is over and gone. A scary memory put away in the back of the sock drawer and almost all but forgotten today. But there were signs, little things that later I would come to see as blatant sign of predators about in the woods around me. I was apparently just oblivious to it, or simply was not familiar with this type of predator, which I was not at the time. Usually, though, I am really good out in the back country or bush, if you will. I have been on my own out there many times, more than I can count. Okay, maybe not that much, but you get what I mean. Maybe it was because of all the studying I had been doing and brought some reading with me to catch up on. That made me simply miss it all. Either way, I should have seen the sign, but I did not. I woke up the next morning with some of my dad's favorite coffee. I remember waiting for me, plus a short stack of Mom's pancakes ready to go. I ate, said my goodbyes, and was on the road again, but this time not for hours, actually. Less than an hour, to be sure. Oh, and by the way, I still visit the campgrounds with my family today to fish. However, we do not camp overnight there, ever. First day, hikers in retreat. I unloaded the tent, the fishing gear, and of course, my bedding, the ice chest, and my favorite old camping chair. And yes, a couple of large books on American history and a biographical study on Martin Luther King Jr., light reading for the week. Ha! I gathered some wood first and set up the tent. After all of that, the morning was half over, so I figured I would fish for a while before I would take an afternoon hike downriver and back. I made my third or fourth cast. I remember watching as 4 or 5 day hikers passed by along the trail on the opposite side of the river. It was a small trail, I remember, that wrapped around the mountain just northwest of the campgrounds and back down towards the river. From there you would continue or turn around and head back. Either way, that track would take them a couple hours or so just to get there and back where I was watching them disappear into the forest ahead of them. I kept casting for a bit. I was fly fishing, by the way. Something new for me at the time. No joke, I took a course on it in school. Seriously, I did. I was getting better with every cast too, I thought. And by the 10th cast, I had a fish on. While I was a little hippie-ish, I was a meat eater, and I loved trout and salmon. I reeled it in, took the hook out, and measured the thing. Perfect 13 inches. Just enough for dinner that night, I thought. At that moment, I heard the hikers coming back up the trail. They should have been gone for at least a couple hours, but there they were, and they seemed to be in a hurry, too. Personally, at the time, I was hoping they were okay, and they seemed to be. However, they kept looking back behind them, as they were now practically fitness walking back up that trail. They were too far away to ask or even say anything. Then again, they were soon out of sight, but not before they came to a complete stop and stood looking back towards the forest from which they came for a moment. Once they were gone, though, everything was pretty quiet for the rest of the afternoon. Just some rafters here and there checking out the fly-fishing college girl as they floated by was all. Click, clack goes the rocks. I would only be here less than 48 hours before I would leave in a rush. And I believe it all started when I saw the hikers in retreat. Eventually, I would come to understand that I believe they were scared off by Bigfoot earlier that day. I returned from the short walk down the river, took out 2 trout I ended up catching earlier and started cooking them. The sun was then setting below the horizon of the mountains, which made it seem a little darker than it should be around that time. At first, I thought it was just some clouds, or some loud cracks from the fire that was making the noise. My back was turned to it as I fixed up my bedding in the tent, and while the foil-wrapped trout cooked over the fire. It was not until I came out of the tent and heard it again that I figured out that it was a clacking sound coming from just across the river. It sounded like rocks being hit together. Personally at the time, however, I figured it was just a woodpecker or some bird cracking something open against a rock. At least I did at first. But it continued for about an hour. Every few minutes or so, I could hear the clacking of what I started to believe were rocks being hit together. I walked down to the river, which was maybe 15 yards away from the campsite, picked up 2 stones and hit them together myself. That was the same sound I had heard from across the river. After I'd done that, the clacking from across the river stopped. I thought to myself, what hits rocks together other than people? So that was it. Someone was hiking along, more like a couple of people or more, and using the sound of clacking rocks to keep contact with each other, or they simply just clacking them together for whatever reason. I could not see anyone as it was too dark, but that was the reason for the sound, I believe for the sound at the time. Looking back now, and after reading up on the subject of Bigfoot, I know better. The only other thing I remember from that night were the crickets. They would start, stop, and start again from time to time. Of course, that did make me nervous, as that is usually a telltale sign of an animal lurking around. However, I was not that nervous, as I believed it was either a mountain lion, black bear, or even something as small as a raccoon or a bobcat at best. Who would have thought it could be a 500-plus pound, 8 or more foot tall monster? I know I wasn't at the time. The crickets came, the crickets went. It was not until near midnight that they came and seemed to stay. I put the book down and headed off to bed, and of course, to keep the wild animals at bay, I played the radio low throughout the night, stoked the fire. Besides, I always fell asleep with the radio playing in the background. Impressions of an escape artist. The next day, while it would be my last for a long time out in the woods, started off rather perfectly. Instead of fly fishing, I did get my line in the water, but this time let it float down to a small pool along the river to sit and hopefully draw in a trout while I cooked breakfast. And the morning was orange juice and a couple of croissants my mother apparently slipped into the ice chest and bag, so instead of cooking, I got to eating and walking around a bit. I decided to see if I could find some animal tracks of whatever it was hanging around last night, so I walked around in a circle near my camp. I was about 20 or so yards back from my site at least. It was not until I neared a path that led to other campsites further into the campground itself that I found, well, impressions. They were not tracks. Tracks we know are completely visible to the human eye. These were impressions at best. However, they were rather long and large impressions. I thought bear at first, as they are sometimes known to double step and make one big track or bear print with front and back paws, but these looked a little different than what I'd seen 1,000 times with Mom and Dad out here in the forests of the Pacific Northwest. It took a bit of a stretch to see it, but I swear at the time I could make out a footprint, like a human footprint. But like I said, and what I remember, it was a stretch to see it that way. What impressions I could make out seemed to lead towards my camp from the edge of the river, stop about 10 yards in back of my site, then head back off north deeper to the campgrounds and forest. Maybe it was someone who was just out for a midnight walk and came too close. I was not completely alone there. I thought to myself, and it seemed like there was at least a couple other campers about 100 yards or more south of me along the river. At least that is what I remember. The reason being was seeing the same car come in and out and in again the day before and did not leave, at least that I know of. So there must have been other campers. Not many, but a couple at least. Either way, it was a person or bear. Either way, it was a person or a bear. And that is what I decided it had to be. I went back to fishing the rest of the morning after that. Whoops and whistles from across the river. At first I thought it was some guys my age or some old perverts across the river whistling at me. Of course, I never saw them. I just heard whistling and even a whoop here and there. It sounded human, at least from where I was standing along the river it did. I had decided earlier to pack a small light lunch and walk downriver about a mile and do some fly fishing in a part of the river that was almost completely flat and placid right before some small whitewater started. There were plenty of rafters that day, but I would have known for sure if it was one of them making the sounds. These whistles and whoops came from across the river up near the trail. Now, thinking back to the day before, I started feeling a little weird. People hiking, a hike that should have taken at least a couple hours, came back within less than 20 minutes and looked to be in a hurry. Was there someone or some bad or menacing people living out there or just hanging out on that side of the river harassing people? And do they now want to harass me? Other questions started reeling through my mind, but it was not until I realized a few minutes later, when my brain slowed down, that I noticed the whistles and whoops had stopped, and all was quiet again. I started casting out as a couple river rafts floated around the bend. This time it was two small families having fun blasting each other with their large water cannons and laughing about it as they waved at me and passed on by. The sounds disappeared, even those from across the river, and I soon felt safe and fine once again. The world was right as rain, and it was beautiful as well, as I took it all in while I continued to fish. I caught 3 trout that afternoon, all over 15 inches. Dragged by Bigfoot in my tent. I went for another short hike late in the day, about a mile and a half up the river, this time to a rock outcropping that practically hung out over the river. From there you could not see much, as there was a bend to the left and right of me in the river, so my view was limited. However, I could see a small mountain, a couple directly actually ahead of me across the river. Once every 30 minutes or so, people fishing in boats would float by and wave, and of course the river guides would wave at the girl a little more energetically as they came around the bend and took notice of me. There must have been people hanging out up the trail a bit. I could hear the muffled sound of voices over there from time to time. Eventually, however, I would come to believe that they were not human voices. I figured they were people at first, just out of earshot, and that was the reason the voices sounded like a garbled mess. They were just too far away. But looking back later, the garbled sounds and muttering seemed to be something else, a different language, I suppose. It was getting darker, and I was getting hungry. The second night would be fish again, but this time I had a pasta salad my mom had made and thrown into a giant plastic bag waiting for me. I listened to the radio until at least 11 p.m. After that, I decided to stoke the fire a bit and add a few logs to it and add a little more light around the camp for a little bit longer that evening. With all the little weird things heard and noticed finally, I was not feeling fearful by any means, I remember, but I did want to be safe as possible, and animals, for the most part, hate fire. At least that is what I've been told and have read 100 times by that point. The crickets were chirping, so by the time I decided to turn in, everything, seemed fine. So I climbed into the tent, I remember, turned the radio down to a volume I could almost not hear myself, and soon fell asleep. I did not know what time it was at that moment, but I knew it had to be at least somewhere around near 3 a.m. when I heard the whoop sound again. This time, however, it came from the backside of my tent. It was close, maybe not more than 15 or so feet away. And that was not the worst part about hearing something so scary in the middle of the night near my tent. It was the fact that there came an answer in the form of a grunt of sorts from the opposite direction. Was someone playing a twisted joke on the lone woman camper? If so, it was not funny. Actually, it was just the opposite. I was starting to feel really scared. Whoever it was, I thought at the moment, started walking towards my tent from the back side. Big, heavy, whoever they were. They had to be to make the ground almost feel like it was vibrating as they approached the tent. They reached the back side and stopped for a second. All I could see was the ambient light that was there disappear. And I mean, it went completely black behind the tent. I slowly started rolling over to get the bear spray and keys out of my side pocket of my backpack. Whoever it was going to feel the pain. If I had a gun, well, I probably would have fired it off in the air just to scare them off. But as I grabbed the keys and had my fingers on the spray, that is when I found myself tumbling to the other side of the tent and smacking the back of my head on the ground really hard. I was being dragged. It was not far. It felt like about 4 or 5 feet at most before I was dropped. Whoever it was dropped me, then walked off towards the river. I decided not to wait around for them to return, as I remember scrambling at that point for the keys that fell out of my hand. I knew I was close to my vehicle, so all I needed to do was get the keys, unzip the tent, and run the 15 feet or so to it. Unfortunately, I left the car unlocked. Why would you lock it while out here anyways? I found the keys, and then I found the zipper. I also found myself being dragged again from behind. This time, however, I crawled out of the tent and ended up rolling on the ground, scraping my knees and elbows pretty badly. But the pain would not be noticed until later. For now, it was simply the feelings of fight or flight that took over. I scrambled to my feet and ran for the car. At that moment, in the middle of the running, I heard the most blood-curdling scream ever, well, almost ever, come from behind me. I kept running. These things, they were not people. Nobody can scream like that. I dove towards the car, opened the door, and shut it, locking it behind me. I was terrified at this point. So getting the right key took a few seconds in my hand because my hands were shaking wildly. Finally, I got it. I put the key in the ignition, but before I turned the old Beetle over, I looked up and out of the front window. I shouldn't have. It changed my life forever. I could not see hair or face or any real features other than stature and bulk of what was a Bigfoot. This thing was humongous, to say the least. I can tell you that this thing was all of 8 to 9 feet tall. Some say Bigfoot have no real neck. I think I noticed a little bit of one, however, but I can't be sure. Its arms were long, though, down around its knees, but unfortunately, because the firelight was almost all but gone, that was all I could make out. As I sat there long enough to get a look at the large figure with my neck cranked forward and up, there came a growl and then another scream to the left of the vehicle, this one louder, angrier, sounding than the last one, to tell you the truth. I could not see where the creature was exactly, but with the volume of the scream that was just as deafening in the car as with the windows rolled up as it would be outside, my gut started to tell me to go, and fast. I turned the car over and backed up a bit, then threw that thing into first and peeled out of there, making a skidding sound as I hit the pavement. Yeah, I was out of there, safe, on the road, and not looking back. I would not go back for anything, not even my books. I would have to buy again. At least I was alive to do so. Still camping today. I still camp today. Call me courageous, nuts, or just call me someone who knows that something like that happening twice would be like getting struck by lightning. Twice. Of course, I am very cautious with my own family out and about in the woods, and sometimes even to a fault, like I said before. Just ask my 2 girls. They never get to go off alone when camping or hiking with Dad and Mom, even today, and they are teenagers.